This video is about Chapter 1 in the book All Labor Has Dignity, which is a collection of Martin Luther King Jr.'s speeches on labor rights and economic justice. Chapter 1 is about a speech he gave to the Highlander Folk School and is talking about the recent developments of integration and having listeners look to the future to fully realize the future of integration. Before I talk about the speech, I want to give a brief history of the school and important historical events that happened at the time the speech was given. The first being the Wagner Act, or the National Labor Relations Act. It was a New Deal reform passed by President Franklin Roosevelt in 1935. This ensured the legal rights of workers to be able to form and organize labor unions to bargain collectively with their employers. Another historical event that happened to take place during the speech was the Red Scare. Now, this speech happened to take place during the second Red Scare. The Red Scare was the fear of communism leaching into the country. The fear was that the government was being infiltrated and there was going to be a communist attack on American soil. Anyone who was viewed as a communist threat was persecuted. Primarily known as a training center for labor and civil rights activists from across the U.S. from the 1930s to the 1960s. It was founded in 1932 by Miles Horton, who was a political activist, Don West, who was an educator, and James A. Dombrowski, a Methodist minister. Rosa Parks and Martin Luther King Jr. were some of its most notable students. In the 1950s, the school became directed at the Black Civil Rights Movement and the school desegregation program in the South. It also developed a literacy program for black students who were being prohibited from voting because of the literacy requirements. Some Southern politicians called the school a bastion of radical communism. In 1961, the state of Tennessee revoked Highlander Folk School's charter and confiscated its property. In 1957, Martin Luther King Jr. came and gave a speech. Unknown to Martin Luther King Jr. at the time, the Georgia Commission of Education sent an agent, Ed Fred, to photograph the meeting. A pamphlet was released later and it was made to seem as if Martin Luther King Jr. was at a communist training school. In it was a photo of him sitting in between a member of the Communist Party, Abner Berry, which was unknown to Martin Luther King at the time, and Aubrey Williams, who was an anti-communist liberal. Groups such as the John Birch Society and the White Citizens Council spread the rumor by sending postcards and plastering the photo on billboards, which started the rumor that Martin Luther King Jr. was a communist. A notable person in the audience for the speech was Rosa Parks. This speech took place 2 years after she refused to give up her seat on the bus in the Montgomery bus boycotts. The essence of the speech is King summarizing the 3 phases of race relations that have gone on in America's history. The 3 phases are slavery, segregation, and integration. Within his speech, King stipulates that all of these times in history were bookended by Supreme Court decisions. A quote from this speech is, "In order to look to the future, it is often necessary to get a clear picture of the past. In order to know where we are going, it is often necessary to see from whence we have come." The first phase was slavery, which took place from about 1619 to 1863. This was when the African American people were seen as more of an it rather than a he or a she. This period in time came to a stop with the Dred Scott decision. Dred Scott was a slave of an army surgeon and was taken from Missouri to Illinois, which is now Minnesota, in the 1830s. The Missouri Compromise declared that the area including Minnesota was free. In 1846, Dred Scott sued for his freedom since he lived in a free territory for a long period of time. After 11 years, this case made it to the Supreme Court, and it was deemed that Dred Scott was still a slave. The second phase was segregation. Segregation took place between 1863 and 1954. In 1869, the Plessy v. Ferguson decision happened, which declared that we could have separate but equal. This was the dominant thought process during this time period. While this was an improvement because this freed African Americans from slavery, they were still less than the white man and had to deal with many injustices in this time period. Integration is the third and final phase. Integration started on May 17, 1954. This time period came with the decision of Brown versus Board of Ed. This deemed that the separate school systems for black and white students was unequal, which violated the Equal Protection Clause in the 14th Amendment. This decision gave equal protection under the law to both races. Some of the opponents of the integration movements are the Ku Klux Klan, the KKK, and the White Citizens Council. The KKK is an American white supremacist hate group that primarily targets African Americans. The Klan first appeared in the time of the Reconstruction and sought to overthrow the Republican state government in the South by using violence against the African American leaders. There is a resurgence of the KKK in the 1950s, which is the KKK that still exists today. They form their own localized groups, and they primarily oppose the civil rights movement, and they usually resort to murder or violence to suppress the activists of equal rights. During this time, they forged alliances with the police departments in the South. They have been convicted in the deaths of the civil rights workers in Mississippi in 1964 and in the bombing of the 16th Street Baptist Church in Birmingham, Alabama. There is an unknown amount of members in the KKK today. Another group is the White Citizens Council. This is a network of white supremacist and extreme right organizations in the United States, mainly concentrated in the South. This group was founded mainly to oppose the racial integration of public schools. They also opposed voter registration efforts in the South. They mainly used intimidation tactics to threaten and commit violence against civil rights activists. Unlike the KKK, who met in secret, this group met openly. Their power waned after the 1970s, after the passage of certain legislation. One of the ending points to Mr. King's speech was the word maladjusted. The definition of the word is the family who are unable to cope with the demands of a normal social environment. At this time, there is a strong push for African American individuals to accept the fact that they will never be equal with their white counterparts, and says that rather that they are maladjusted to the world around them. King requests for them to embrace that and continue to be maladjusted until they are given the equal rights that they deserve. The rest of the speech is Martin Luther King Jr. saying that we are no longer in the time of the Old South. A quote from the speech says that many of the problems in the South today grow out of the futile attempt of the white South to perpetuate a system of human values that came into being under a feudalistic plantation system, which cannot survive in a day of the democratic equalitarianism. Yes, the Old South is a lost cause. He urges black citizens to refuse anything from society that is not equality.